Hey, thanks for stopping by my channel. In this video, we're going to cover everything I think that you need to know as you are starting your bug bounty journey within the realm of HTML and JavaScript. This is just an introductory course, so if you find this video helpful, please let me know if you'd like me to expand this course into a full HTML and JavaScript course for the purpose of bug bounty hunting and ethical hacking. My goal for you in this course is to come away with the ability to read HTML when you inspect the source code or you view the page source. I want you to be able to understand what's going on, what are all the tags and the links that are within the HTML, and I want you to be able to understand how it all fits together. And so I'm going to walk you through how to actually write some HTML, and then from there we're going to move on to view the CSS and how it organizes and beautifies the HTML. And then after that, I'm going to cover some very basic JavaScript. My goal isn't to teach you how to code in JavaScript, but rather just be able to understand what the JavaScript is doing when you see it. I want you to be able to recognize the variables, the for loops, the while loops, and what exactly the JavaScript is doing when you come across it. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into it. Okay, so here we are at codepin.io. We're going to be starting out with basic HTML and how to understand it. So you can come over here and go to this web application and click Start Coding, and it will load up for us what we need. You might have a display that looks something like this or this. I like it all the way over here to the right, so that way my actual website will look similar to the way you would see it in an actual browser. So we can come over here and minimize this, and we can minimize this because we're not going to be dealing with CSS or JavaScript just yet. And basic HTML and tags, I want to show how HTML tags look. So HTML, what is HTML? It is the hypertext markup language, and it's the language of the internet. There's also XML, which is another markup language, but we're not going to deal with that just yet because we are on HTML. So when you come to HTML, you can make static websites. They won't look very nice, but you can make them, and you can do this with just HTML. And so let's just start coding along, and you'll be able to understand it as we go. So let's say we're making a journal entry to a book, or we're just making a table of contents. You could start out with just a basic H1, and then you'll make another H1, only you're going to put a forward slash, and we're going to close it out. And then in here, we can say this is a title. And then it will render for us over here. And we have this closing tag. And this closing tag is actually really important because let's say I had by me. And as it loads this, it's going to put all of this in here. And it puts it all in big font. And when we close this out, like we already saw and the way you're supposed to do, it will load it differently. You can see the H1 makes the text really big. And let's say we want to enclose this. Actually, we'll enclose the me down here with an H2, just like this. And you can see this has changed right here. And you can see that it is smaller. And if we make this, let's say we want to make this an H4, you can see as the numbers go up, the size of the font gets smaller. So the H1 is for the top heading, and everything gets smaller. And then you also have a paragraph tag that looks like this. And in here would be what you would consider a paragraph. So you can just write in here something, and then we can close this out just like this, and you'll be able to see that it renders just the same. And now we have this paragraph tag. So you have headings and paragraphs, and you can format the text and the style with the CSS, which we will do later. But right now, I just want you to have a basic understanding of how HTML works and get to understand and be familiar with these tags. You can actually go to a documentation website for such as W3 Schools. And so for now, I want you to get an understanding of these tags, and you can go to W3 Schools and read the documentation about all the different tags. And we're going to see quite a few different ones as we go along, but these tags become really important for cross-site scripting and other vulnerabilities because we're going to have to learn how to break out of these tags in order to insert our own malicious code in the future. Okay, so now that we are familiar with a closing tag, there are some kinds of tags that do not require a closing tag, and these are typically tags that do not have any input. Like these all take some kind of text that they render on the page. There are some tags that are self-closing, such as a break tag, and this tag does not take any text or input, and what it does is it spaces out these gaps right here. And there is also another tag called an HR tag, and this will place a line underneath of the text. This is usually done in like basic resume style HTML websites. You won't really see a whole lot of this in actual web applications. And if you do, usually stuff like this is done with a border inside of CSS in a div. But this is something to be aware of, that there are self-closing tags within HTML, and you will probably see these. I want you to be familiar with all the different kinds of tags you are going to be seeing when you're looking through source code and you're looking for vulnerabilities, as well as trying to figure out how to get a cross-site scripting to work. And it is always helpful to be familiar with the tags, because some tags may be blacklisted while others are not, and they can be helpful in helping you break out of an HTML element in order to get a cross-site scripting to work. And another thing to be aware of, if you see something like we just saw with the HR and we see this pop up on the screen and we decide we want to add a size to it and we want to make it bigger or smaller, and you can see this is running in pixels, so if we do 39, that's going to be really big. I meant to make it just 9. You can see that our line shows up, and I think you can also add a shadow, but I don't remember how to do that with an HR tag. If you ever see this and you're wondering, wow, I really like how this looks, I would like to be able to make a tag that looks just like this one on a web application. You can inspect and you can actually just look to see exactly where it is at. Let me see if I can. We'll grab this, inspect, and right here you see the HR size 3. And it's really important to be familiar with inspecting specific things, because it's possible in the future that you're going to have an input field and you are able to search. It renders within the HTML, and you're going to need to be able to inspect to see where the word is within the HTML, so that you know exactly what you need to do in order to break out of it to get your malicious code to run. We'll get more into that in the future, but for now, let's continue with HTML and what it looks like and becoming more familiar with it. We're going to move on from here, and we're actually going to install a text editor. I'm going to have you install Visual Studio Code if you're new, or you can use whatever text editor you would like, but I'm going to be using VS Code. So what we can do is come over here and we can just type in VS Code just like this, and you will come to this page right here. You can click download, and you can download it for whatever OS system you are using, and you can go ahead and download it and then install it. It's pretty simple to install and open up. And when you're here, you will want to make a new folder. And I'm just going to leave it. We can barely see my folder over here. I'm going to rename it as test app. You can call yours whatever you would like, and then we're going to open it up. So we'll come over here, click open, go to desktops, and I named it test app right here. And I can open this, and it will open over here just like this, and we can open up a new file and say index.html, and when we hit enter, it's going to open up our index.html. Because we're in VS Code, right here's where you go to install plugins. I'm just going to have you install one plugin right now, and we're going to type in boilerplate. I think you could just type in boil, yes, and it goes ahead and opens this up. We want HTML boilerplate, and you'll hit install right here. I already have it installed. And then when we come back to our index.html, if we just type in HTML, we can go down to this 5 right here and hit enter, and we'll be given the boilerplate. And now you can delete this right here. This is how we want to keep this, so we can save this right here. And a helpful tip to render what we have going on in a browser, we can just right click and we can just say we want to open with Google Chrome, and it will open up a page for us like this. I actually want to put this page over here so you can see it. And if we just come over to our body right here and we just type in, and let's make it in H1, and we'll just say hello world, save this, And if we come over here and refresh our page, it will render for us our hello world. So now that we know everything is working, we're going to begin looking at a little more in-depth advanced HTML that we will need to know in order to break out of our HTML to perform cross-site scripting and insert JavaScript. So with that, I'll see you in the next video. All right, so we have our own little web application running over here, and now we're going to enter a little bit in here. So instead of this H1, we can enter our name, and we'll make like an entry that we would see into something kind of like a Wikipedia page. So you have a name, and then you're going to want a title, and the title is going to be what goes on up here, like create a plan or a React app. We're going to go ahead and name it, and this actually goes inside the head tag. And so we can open this up, title. I guess I probably shouldn't open that up, because if I close it off, I think it'll automatically close it for me. And we can say Ryan's site, and then we'll save it. And then if you come over here and refresh this, it should refresh for us. We got your site and your name, and you can add in a paragraph tag. So we can say, what do we want to say about ourselves right here inside this paragraph? And we can say, I am learning to become a hacker. So this is true for all of us here, and what maybe we want to make this hacker right here, we want it to be italicized and bold. So we can come in here and we can say we want all of this to be emphasized, and it closes that off there for us. And we'll paste it over here, and we'll save this, and maybe we want the word hacker to be bold, so we can come in here and say we want this to be strong. And we can move this as well. And now if we save this and refresh our page over here, it has all become italicized. I'm not sure why this didn't become bold for me. I believe that's supposed to be bold, but that's okay if it doesn't work for us. My goal right now is for you to be understanding that there are different tags, and we can actually add in a break tag. Like say we decide we want this word hacker right here to be on the next line. We can add in a break, and we can refresh it, and now we have it on the next line. And maybe we decide after this that we want a line underneath everything, and so we'll say we want the HR in here for the line break, and if we refresh this, we now have our line. So we're starting to get a entry form here, kind of like a Wikipedia page. I actually should look at a Wikipedia page so I know what they actually look like. But anyway, my goal for us is to begin to understand these tags, and we're going to look at a few more tags, and then we're going to start looking at what goes inside these tags, because sometimes you'll be inside of something that looks like this, and you're going to have to figure out how to break out of this tag, because your entry input will be saved inside of a source or inside of something within a tag. And so we're going to learn more about inputs over here in just a little bit. For now, we're going to look at a few more tags that are going to be really common, and you're going to see a lot when you look at page source. Now that I'm about to close this out, I actually see that I spelled the word strong wrong here. So if we save that and now we come over here and we refresh our page, it becomes bold for us there. So inside of our HTML and our tags, we will need to spell things correctly. Otherwise, the interpreter will not know what we're doing or how to translate it into the web page. Okay, with that, I will see you in the next video. Now I want us to look at lists, and in the next video we're going to look at image tags, which are going to be really important because they're a main way to get an XSS to work, and so those will be coming up. But for now, we have our little web app that looks like this, and underneath the HR we're going to add in a list, and the way to add in a list can be done with a UL, and you just add in an LI like this. And now we're going to type into our list, and we're going to go ahead and put in I have learned about tags. And in our next one, dang it, in the Python text editor, you can hit tab and it'll go past your tag for you, and then you can go down to the next line. So we'll add another list just like this, and we're going to say I have learned about lists, And then we can say, lastly, next I will learn about image tags. And now if we save this, come over to our page and refresh it, we have these bullet points just like this. And if we wanted them to be numbers, it's pretty simple. You just would change this to an OL like so. And I forgot to save it. And now we can refresh the page and we have 1, 2, 3. So these are lists and tags. You'll see these sometimes. You'll be able to have inputs, and one of the really popular places to see something like this is inside of some kind of task manager or something. You will see these in live programs or maybe in a penetration test where you're testing some kind of application that is supposed to help you schedule, and you'll be able to input lists and things like this. And maybe there will be some way for you to inject either over here or over here, but these are the LI tags and this is the OL. So when you see these in a page source, you now know what is going to be going on. Now we're going to move on to the image tag, and we're going to pop our first cross-site scripting, only we're going to use an alert because we're not going to be injecting it into anything. But I want you to see how it works because you're going to see these image cross-site scriptings a lot in the future. They are really popular if you can get one to store for the cross-site scripting to pop every single time the page loads. So with that, we will move on in the next video. A few more things to go over and learn before we are ready to start practicing cross-site scripting elsewhere. And the first thing we need to cover is an image tag. The image tag is going to be one that you're going to see a lot in CTFs and practicing cross-site scripting because it will automatically render on the page whenever it is loaded, or if there's some kind of submit button for an on error to cause an event. So with that, we will just start out with a basic understanding of inserting an image. So if you just type in IMG, it should load for you. You have this alt, which is what's going to load if the source doesn't work. So we can just say Ryan because I'm going to use my image, and if we save this and we'll say the source is lost, so obviously there's not going to be any source. If we come over here and we refresh the page, we see Ryan and it tells us the little image is not found. But if we go out to, say, Google and we type in who am I, and we type in PhD security, and then we go to images, here I am right here, and we can copy the image address right here. Make sure I'm trying to read those, make sure that's right. And if we paste this in here and then we save this huge link, when we refresh our page, our little browser that we have created right here is going to go out to this linked address that we have right here on YouTube to grab my image, and it's going to ping it and make sure that we have permission to load this image right here. So if we save this and refresh, you can see my image has popped up right there. Now I don't like where this is at, so I'm going to delete this, and that's one way to grab an image, and you will probably see that in the future, and you'll definitely see when images aren't loaded. That's usually what's happening. Now I already got the photo over here, same photo. You will see this as well. This is the most common way to load an image, and it's also the most reliable way. I actually want to put it underneath my name because it'll look better in our little wiki page right here. So if we do our same thing and we say image, and the source is just ryan.png because it is already loaded right here for us, and we save it, we can put in the alt, would just say my name, and we save it and we refresh it. You see it moves up here, and that is because it's grabbing the link right here. Now I think the most popular way to perform a cross-site scripting, especially in CTFs that don't have any kind of blacklisting, is going to look just like this. Source, you just put some mumbo jumbo in there, that's not going to work. And then an alt, doesn't really matter. What you're going to see is an on error, and then it's going to do something, and usually the do something is going to be alert and 1, and then save this, refresh our page, and you see the cross-site scripting pops right there for us. And you'll see something like, sometimes people will put in a 1, sometimes people will put in XSS, and sometimes you can just see a 1, 2, 3, save it. We got too many closing brackets, And on our page over here, refresh, we see this page says 1, 2, 3. And that is going to be probably the most common cross-site scripting that you're going to see in beginner CTFs. And the reason you're going to see it done like that in the beginning is because this is really easy and your input isn't being stored anywhere. We're going to get a little more complicated as we go along with the cross-site scripting. This is how you're going to see images loaded in HTML, and this is how you're going to see a lot of cross-site scriptings performed. You're going to see this image payload all over the place. So if we come back to our payloads, look, we have image, 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 and you always see this on error. And here's an on click. And you're just going to see a lot of these image tags. Here's another image tag. And so you're going to want to be familiar with understanding the image tag and then how to perform the cross-site scripting with it. As we go along, things are going to get more interesting and a lot more fun to try and break out of. I know cross-site scripting doesn't pay a lot of money usually, but it is a lot of fun to break out of the HTML tags and bypass the bad characters. So with that, we're going to look at hrefs and hyperlinks in the next section, and then we're going to start looking at getting cross-site scripting to work for us. And then after that, we're going to start looking at cross-site scripting and breaking out of HTML tags. So with that, I will see you in the next video. Okay, so we're here with our code for our very simple website that we have going on right here. And so far we have just a static website with nothing really going on. And I want to move on into hrefs, and we're going to build this inside of an anchor tag. So right now, if we refresh this page right here, we're going to get our XSS. So we're going to go ahead and comment this out. I think you can just click at the end of the line. Yes, you can. You can click at the end of the line, and on a Mac you hit command / or command ? And it comments out the line there for us. And below this, we're going to add in our anchor tag, which is just going to make us have a clickable link. So we're going to go href, which this is going to be the link that we are actually wanting to add to our website. And we're going to just give something very basic like google.com. So we can go https:/, and then we go www.google.com. And if we save this and then we come over here and refresh, you will see our link when we add it in over here, Google. I forgot to add that text in, and I forgot to save it. So we'll save it, refresh our page, and now we have this link right here. And if we open link in new tab, we are taken to Google. So this is really simple, and you can I've actually been seeing these little anchor tags also inside of the source right here become a place for cross-site scripting. I'm not really sure why developers have been making it so your user input, say there's like an input box, or you can just come up here and you would do something like this and just add in a parameter of something equals and then XSS script right here. I've been seeing at least twice in the last month that right there, that XSS would get stored either right here or right here, and all we have to do is break out of these little links or the source or the href in order to get our cross-site scripting to work. So we'll just pretend for now rather than actually build an input, because that's going to require some JavaScript in order to get it to be saved inside of this link. But one of the things you should always do and always check for is if you can add in a parameter right here like this, or you're able to just insert something into like a text field and hit search, like on a search bar on Amazon or Google, and then you inspect the text like this. You should always check to see if your information is getting stored in here, like this cross-site scripting. You should always come in here and look for the cross-site scripting or your keyword that you were able to put into the input. So I want to just show you like how to break out of this for cross-site scripting. Let's say we're able to add a parameter and it adds it into this google.com. The most recent one that I saw, it was actually appending what I put in as a parameter down inside of a page one. It was like something like this, page one equals, and this was at the foot of the application. So it would have looked something like this right here. And if we save this comment that out, and then we come back over here and we refresh this. It was down here at the bottom and it was like page 1, and within this page 1 it had my little cross-site scripting payload that I was adding in right here. And so we'll pretend that is what we have going on, is that we're able to add in a parameter and it's getting stored right here, and we need to break out of this in order to get our cross-site scripting to work. Because if you just come in here and type in script alert and then you close this out, nothing is going to happen. And I'll show you, we might even get an error. We come over here, we refresh it, and nothing happens. You click on it, nothing happens. We're not able to, because what's going on right now is we're not breaking out of the current HTML. And there's a couple of different ways to go about this, and this is all going to be trial and error. And sometimes when I come across something like this in the wild, I'll just copy this and I will paste it into a text editor just like this, because the colors are going to change when the payload is ready to work. So you should be aware of copying this and bring it into a code sandbox or some kind of text editor to play around with it. But I think this one is going to be pretty easy to break out of. You just add in some quotations right here in order to close this out, and then you can add a closing tag. And now if we save this and we come over here and we refresh the page, we get our cross-site scripting to work. And they really are this easy to find in the wild, especially if you're off the beaten path where payloads have not been tested and people haven't been looking for cross-site scriptings like this. The one that I found really was this simple. All I had to do was come up here into the URL and I just added in a random parameter. So you can just add in, for the sake of example, a CB, like a cache buster, even though we're not doing web cache poisoning. And then you can just add in a parameter of payload, and then we would say equals. And the way you would get this to store is you would type in our script that we put in just like this in order to close off this anchor tag. And then we just add in our payload. And so you'd go like this and you'd say script, spell it right, script, and then we would have alert, and then we would close off our payload just like this. And then you submit this. This is how it worked for me, and this right here was getting stored inside of the href just like this. So that is one way to pull off a cross-site scripting inside of a anchor tag. And sometimes you'll see these inside of something like this, because if you're familiar with Burp and you see the header tags and it sends a refer header showing where you came from in order to get to the next page, it'll have in the previous website that you've come from. And I actually came across a website that was storing the previous URL inside the HTML in a hidden input field. And all I had to do was copy it and then basically do the exact same thing we were doing earlier and just add in our script just like this in order to get the alert to work. So you can look out for these in a lot of different places, such as an href or inside of a source. And just be aware that where you put things within the input may get stored randomly within the HTML. And then all you have to do is be familiar with HTML, such as closing off the quotes and then closing off the tag and then pulling off the cross-site scripting. So with that, we're going to move on and look at some more HTML in the next video. All right, so there's two things I really want to show you before we move on from HTML, and we take just a second to look at CSS, and then we move into JavaScript, and that is hidden information as well as forms. And so we'll just start out with forms, and it will naturally lead into the hidden elements. So a form is pretty much just what it sounds like. It is one of those things that usually includes inputs and information that you're going to be taking in from the user. So usually within a form, you'll have a class, which we're actually not going to mess with until we get to the CSS, and then you'll have some kind of action typically, and this is going to take you somewhere, and we're not going to mess with that really either. And then we're going to also see a method, which we're not going to mess with as well. This is what would be sending the information to the server. Okay, and now we're going to want to add in a label just like this. And inside of this label, we're going to delete that, and we're just going to say your name. So we have this, your name right here. So if we save it and we come over to our page and refresh, you will see it pop up on our page. And I added in this little HR so that you could see the division of the information. And right here is the your name. So we have our label, and now we want to take an input. So what we will do is add in an input. So we just say input just like this, and it's going to be a type text, and we're not going to mess with the ID or the name at this point. And if we save this, you're going to see just a box appear over here. And so it says your name, and then we have this text box. We're going to end up adding a button as well. So we will say we want a button, and it's just going to say submit, even though our button at this point is not going to do anything. And we can save this and refresh, and now we have your name with this text box and a submit button that does nothing. And then lastly, you're going to see within these forms is a password, and you're going to see something like another input just like this, and instead of the type text, you're going to see a password. And if you save this and we come back over to our page and we look at this, actually we're going to go ahead and add in a break because we want this on a new line. So we save this, we refresh it, and that's pretty ugly. And you'll see we have these little hidden dots just like here. This is to secure the password, and you'll see these a lot on web applications, but now they've started adding in this little eye over here for you to be able to see what you're typing in, because if you know any HTML and CSS at all, you know that you can just right click this and you can inspect, and then you can come in here and just change this password to text and then look at it just like this, and you can see the information that is being typed in here. And this is why people, when they use public computers, should never save their password, because if you use a public computer and you log in and you accidentally hit save password, then the next user can come in here and repopulate the password and look at your email and password and have your information, which would be very bad. So don't use public computers to enter in literally any of your data that is important to you. So there's one more thing I want to show you, and that is the hidden option. And so we're going to actually use a div here, and I want to show you that you can just type in hidden right here, and usually this hidden will be something other than the actual word hidden. There's other ways to hide elements within HTML, but we're going to use hidden because it's really simple. And then sometimes you'll see something like ID equals 8. And then if we save this, I've never actually seen this in the wild, only in CTFs. So this is not going to be something you're probably going to encounter in the wild, but you will probably see it in CTFs, as I've seen it in several CTFs. And you come over here and you refresh this page, you can see that we have this div ID 8 and it's hidden, and we can unhide this by just deleting the word hidden, and now the ID shows up on the actual page. And usually within CTFs, this ID 8 will be within a form, and you would just change this 8 to something else. So you could come down here and say we're going to change the ID to 1, which would typically be an admin, and then you would hit the submit form and it would change your ID to 1. That's usually how it'll work in CTFs. I've never actually seen this in the wild, but it is something to be aware of, that you can change this hidden to anything. You can just delete it, and then you can change things within forms that have been hidden quite simply just by changing it. So that is something else to be aware of within the world of HTML and CSS. All right, so we have a future edit here, and I just want to say the reason that this would work in most CTFs is because if there is no JavaScript to check the user ID input, then when you hit the submit button, it would go ahead and send it. But in most cases, there's going to be JavaScript to check such functions. So a lot of times this is not going to work, and we will cover this more in the future. But for now, I have seen this in CTFs where you can change an ID because there's no JavaScript checking to make sure that the user client side input is what it is supposed to be. In the next video, we're going to give just a quick look at CSS. Because we're not trying to be web app developers, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on CSS, just going to give you a quick overview so that you know what it is, and when you see it, you'll be able to recognize it and know that it really isn't anything important to you, unless you are crazy good and you can pull off some kind of remote code execution through a CSS injection, which can happen but is really advanced. So we're going to just look at some simple basic CSS. so that you are aware of what it is and you aren't questioning when you see it inside of some source code. I'll see you in the next video. All right, we're gonna have a look at some CSS. We're not gonna spend a ton of time working on our little website here, making it look nice. For me, I am not a designer and I don't understand web design and fashion or anything like that, or color coordinating. So in the world of web development, this is, for me, the most difficult part, is making a website look nice. Some people are just gifted as designers and I am not one of them. So I'm just going to show you how CSS works in two different ways. I'm going to show you internal CSS and I'm going to show you external CSS. So that way when you come across CSS, you know what you are looking at and you're familiar with it. I'm not going to actually show you how to design a web app because that is not my area of expertise and it's not my gifting. If we want to do some internal styling, we can just come in here and type in style and we can hit enter, and then we have this H1 right here that has our name in it. So we could just very easily just type in H1 and then we open a set of curly braces and then we can just type in color and then we can just type in aqua. Looks like a great color, and then we close it off with our little colon there and we save it and we come over and refresh our page. I see I didn't type in H1, typed in HR. So we type in our H1, save it, refresh, and our color changes to blue. And then maybe we want to change the word right here, hacker. There's another way you can go around doing internal styling, and you can just come in here and say that you want a color, and then we say we want pink, and then we can save it this way. And then if we refresh it, our color works. So there's several different ways you're going to see internal CSS, and this right here is the most common. This happens, but it doesn't happen very often. So when you're out in the wild, you will see CSS function like this, and you can also do a lot more with this. We're not going to cover it, so you could come in here to this H1 and you can type in something like padding, and you can say padding left, and then we could say like 200 pixels. And then if we were to save this and come back over and refresh it, you'll see that the name moved. I'm not sure if there is a centered option. Let's check it out. There is not. So there's something called bootstraps that would really help you with your styling if you were trying to become an actual developer, but we're not going to spend a ton of time with that. So you can do things like the padding left. You could do a padding for the bottom if we wanted some space between our information here, and you could say 100 pixels, and you could save this, and if you came over here and refresh it, we'll get a padding over here. So this is a little bit of styling, and one thing to be familiar with is a lot of times things are going to be broken up into divs. So you would have something like this right here. You would have a div, and we'll just copy this and cut, and we can paste that right here. And then we'll put another one. We'll put this right here, and then we'll put one down here between our list that we have right here. And then if we were to put something inside of here, like we say this div, we want to style it, and we say style, and then we want color, and then we're going to make this entire color red. It's going to be very bold, and then we decided to make a different div, and we wanted the entire color to be, let's say we'll make this entire color pink, and we save this and we refresh our page. You're going to see that everything within those divs actually changes colors, except this overwrites what was written inside the div. So we can actually just go ahead and close this out right here. And now if we come back and refresh, you can see everything becomes red and pink within the specific div. And so this is an introduction to internal CSS. You can style it either up here like this, or you can do some internal CSS. And so the divs are going to be like, you can, within HTML and CSS, you can think of everything as being inside little boxes, and there's actually a Chrome extension. It'll actually show you all of the boxes, and it's called Pesticide, and you can install it if you want. I'm not going to show it because the point of our course is not to learn how to be designers. The point is for us to understand CSS well enough to know what we're looking at so that we can figure out how we can exploit web applications when we come across it. So with that, in the next video, we're going to look at external CSS. Okay, in this video, we're going to look at an external style sheet, and then I'm going to show you why this was important for you to learn. So the first thing we're going to do is we can just go ahead and delete these inline styles that we put in right here, so that way we have our blank page like we did before. And we can just go ahead and delete the style altogether, and then if we save this and go back to our page and refresh, everything is back to how it was before. Now what we are going to do is come right here, and we're going to add a folder just like this, and we're going to call it CSS. And then inside this folder, we're going to add a new page, and we're going to call it style.css. And you can see our Visual Studio has recognized it as a style sheet. Come back to our index.html, and inside of the head tag up here, we can type in link, and it tells us that it has this style sheet, and we have the href2, and we want to link our CSS style sheet just like this, and it auto saved for us, and we can now save it. And now you can come over to your style sheet, and if we wanted to do like we did before, we can type in the h1, and we can type in color, and we can say red. And if we save this and come back over to our page and refresh this, our name is now red because that was the h1. We can do something like we did before with these divs, and we can say we want to give the div a color. So we could say div1, we want to have a color of blue. So we can come in here, we put our period before the div, and this is going to tell it that this is going to be our keyword. And we can say color, and we want blue, just like this, and then we'll make a div2, so we'll say period div2, I forgot this was div1, and we can say we want the color of pink. We'll go div1 right here, and we can say style div1, and I just realized that this is supposed to say class because we've given it a class name over here. And then if we give our second div a class of div2, and we save this, and we come over here and refresh it, we now have the colors have changed within our div, and our name color has changed. So this would be a form of external CSS, and I want to show you why it was important for you to know this. And it's important to know that this file was named CSS, and then we called it style.css. If we come back over here and we just check out this color palette and we inspect the page, and then you come over here to the sources, you can actually click on this CSS right here. Yours might not be all in line like this. You can click on the CSS, click on the style page, and then click the pretty right here to make it look pretty. And you can see just like this what they have done. It is organized just like ours. So this would be an anchor tag, which would be clickable, and they have red, green, blue, not sure what the A is, and then they have the text decoration, none. And so you can see their style sheet is called CSS just like ours, and style.css, and then it is formatted exactly the same way, and this would be an external style sheet. And then if you come back to looking at the elements, you can see the class right here, the class names for how they decided to name their classes and organize what they look like based on the CSS. So now when you come in here and you inspect a page and you come across a CSS file, you'll know what you're looking at, and you'll also be familiar with seeing class inside of the divs. seeing these class names. And that is going to wrap up for us the CSS internal and external. I will see you in the next video. Okay, we're going to be moving into a section on JavaScript. And so as we go through JavaScript, it will be helpful for you to have a great place to practice your JavaScript, and a really easy place to practice JavaScript is within the Chrome developer tools. So I would suggest, if you do not have Chrome installed, go ahead and install Chrome, because we're going to be using it throughout the portion of our JavaScript course. So an easy way to practice JavaScript is just come over to your web app that we have running within Chrome. We can go to inspect, and then we will go to sources. You are going to be on this page right here. We're going to hit these two arrows right here, and we're going to say snippets, and then we'll say new snippet, and then you can just call this index.js, which is the file name within your code that you would have it named over here. And then you can actually just type in your JavaScript right over here, and then when you're done, you can run it just like this by hitting play, and it'll hit up an alert for us. And then if we want to do something like a console.log, and then we want to log something, it will actually pop open the console for us right down here, and it will tell us what we have logged. So this is going to become more familiar with you as we are going along. But this is where we're going to be practicing our JavaScript. And if you're unfamiliar with JavaScript entirely, JavaScript is the scripting language of the internet. So if you were wanting to become a web application penetration tester or a bug bounty hunter, JavaScript is going to be something you're going to want to learn, because it is the language of the internet. It is what gives websites functionality. So when you go to a web application and you see things moving around and stuff happening, that is going to be thanks to JavaScript. So JavaScript is going to be very important for us to learn, and we're going to spend quite a significant amount of time learning this JavaScript. And so buckle up and get ready for JavaScript. One thing that is important to know about JavaScript, and really any scripting language, is syntax. So you saw me type in alert just like this, and then we can type in the word hello. And then if we close this off, this is not going to work for us. We're actually going to get an error, and if we open up our console, it tells us that we have an error right here. The reason is because these characters within this alert need to be within side quotations, because this is considered a string. So JavaScript wants to interpret whatever's inside of here either as integers, such as 1, 2, 3, and this will run for us and it will work because these are integers, or you're going to need to have strings inside here. So if we type in some characters, we will need them inside of a string. And now if we run this, it will work for us. So we have this alert right here. What is this alert? This alert is calling a function within a JavaScript, and in the future we're going to make our own custom functions. But for now, all you need to know is this alert is a function, and it is going to pop up the string of characters that are put within here that are being passed within the function. And then I believe we need this within Chrome Developer Tools to close off our alert, and I guess we do not. But typically when you close something off, you will close it off with a semicolon just like this. So it's best practice to go ahead and start putting it in there now as we are practicing. So with that, I will see you in the next lesson. Before we make it too far into our JavaScript lesson, I think it's helpful to know there are several different types of data types, and we've already saw this one right here with a string. But if we pull open the console here, which is really great, it is going to be a very useful tool to us as we're learning our JavaScript. We can type in something called type of, just like this, and then we can put whatever we want inside of our brackets right here, and we can say we want to put in 1, 2, 3, and it tells us this is a number. And if we put in a string right here like this, we don't even have to type anything in, and it tells us this is a string. And then we also have one other type of data type that will be really helpful to us, especially when we're running while loops, and that is true, false, and it will tell us this is a Boolean. So you have strings, integers, and Booleans, and we're going to be using all of these as we move into into our JavaScript, and it will be helpful for you to remember these. You're also going to see these within different exploit write-ups within the world of hacking, and so it's important to know that you have integers, strings, and booleans, because you will come across these in the future. And if you ever do any kind of programming or you're writing up the code for your own exploits or modifying exploits, you will need to know what is going on and what kind of data types you are dealing with. So with that, there is one more area of JavaScript that I want to cover before we start trying to write any kind of code or do any kind of exercises, and that is variables. So with that, we will check those out in the next video. Okay, so here we are with our variables, and there's a couple different ways I want to show you how to use variables. The very first thing I want to tell you about variables is that it stores some information for you. A variable is going to store some kind of data that we can later come back and say we want this variable, what information is within it, and it will tell us the information that is in it. So for example, if I say var equals 2 plus 3, and then we have to name our variable, and we'll just call it num. So we have this var num equals 2 plus 3. We need to close off our JavaScript here. 2 plus 3. There we go. Get rid of that error, and if we run this, it's going to tell us that we have nothing happening because we need to console log this. So we go console.log, and we're going to log the number. So this is our variable being passed through the console log function, and if we run this, we get the number 5 down here. So this number contains the information 2 plus 3, which is going to be 5, and the console.log just prints the variable down here for us. So we have this right here, and when we run it, we get our number. But how can we take information from the user and use it? There is a function called the prompt, and if you're very familiar with cross-site scripting at this point, then you have for sure seen this in cross-site scripting payloads. A prompt is also another way to view a cross-site scripting instead of an alert. And so you can say prompt, and then we can pass in our information here that we want, and we can say what is your name, question mark, and we can close this off. And if we run this, it should give us this little alert here, and we can say Ryan, okay, and then it prints down here for us. But how do we get this information that we put in here? We need a variable. So if you want, you can go ahead and pause this video and see if you can figure out how to store this prompt in a variable called name, and then get it to console log down here what our name is, or the information that we put into the prompt. And you can go ahead and give this a try now. Okay, this is a pretty simple challenge. All we're going to do is change this to a var name equals what is being put in the prompt, and then if we come down here, we can console.log, and then we'll put up our brackets, and we'll say name, just like this. And now if we run this, we're going to get a prompt, and this time we're going to say Ryan J, okay, and it prints out for us Ryan J down here for us through our console log. I'm actually not entirely sure if it will print anything. If we don't put the console log, it does not. So the console log is necessary to be here for our name to be printed. So we can try this again, and we say name, and it prints name for us. Now there is another way to go about this without the console log, and we could type in like our cross-site scripting that we are familiar with, and we can say hello, and then we can pass in the name function. So we should be able to type in hello plus name, and if we run this and we say Ryan, we get an alert saying hello Ryan. So this is how an alert would work with a console log. The space has to be put right here. That was my problem on why I couldn't get that to space. So we just say like that, hello space and then name, and so now it should alert hello Ryan, just like that. Okay, so you just need this space in here to get the space in the alert. So this is a variable and a prompt. And so I want you to get used to looking at these types of variables and information. So just go ahead and play around and maybe do some simple math, store it in a variable, display it in an alert, maybe do a couple console logs before going on to the next video. Set away your familiar with variables and how they work. Okay, so in this video, we're going to cover the while loop, and in the next video, we're going to cover the for loop. And I decided to start with the while loop because it is quite a bit easier to understand. And we're going to just make a simple while loop, and we're going to count to 100. So we can say I equals 0, and then we'll say while I is less than or equal to 100, we want it to do something, and we want to console log I, so we'll go console log, and then we'll say I, so that way it prints the I for us. And the next part is very important. We'll say I plus plus, and this will add 1 to I every time. So the first time it runs, it'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on until it reaches 100, and then it will stop. If you do not have the I++, you'll probably freeze your computer and have to force restart. So this is very important. And so we can go ahead and run this, and it prints out for us that we have all of the numbers here for us, starting with 0. And so this is the while loop. It runs a function or whatever is inside of the while loop until it has reached the total destination. And sometimes you can have a while loop running with taking user input, and when the user input says to quit, you can shut the while loop off. But we're not going to go into that because I don't think it's something you need to know in order to be an ethical hacker. And with that, we will move into the for loop. Okay, so the for loop is going to look a little more daunting and scary, but it really isn't once you understand how for loops work. So if you're coming from another programming languages, for loops are really simple, but in JavaScript, they're a little more difficult because JavaScript is the language of the web. It's not made to run for loops in a simple manner like Python. So if we run a for loop and we're just going to run a simple counter like we just saw, we can say something like for, and it's going to ask us, do we want to run a for loop? And we're going to say yes, and it gives us the boilerplate for a for loop. So we'll just leave this index instead of I, and so we're just going to say that I equals 0, and as long as it is less than 100, we're going to go ahead and say I, or index in this case, plus plus, and then we can just console log this. And then we'll say index just like this. And now if we run this, we're going to get an output down here of counting to a specific number. So in the world of programming, I almost always use for loops. I rarely use while loops, but I just wanted you to see these for loops and while loops so that you can read them when you're looking through JavaScript code for vulnerabilities.